Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're having a bit of a soggy morning here in Florida. As you can see, I'm a little bit damp, but I'm okay. If you hear a dull roar or a couple of claps of thunder and lightning in the background, it is because we are going through a heavy rain here this morning, a much needed one. It's part of the same system that has been hitting different parts of the country and causing tornadoes in some places, and our hearts go out to them, and we pray that it doesn't happen here, but we're appreciative of the rain. All right, we got a great show for you today, and we're going to get right into it. The first story is, can President Trump order the states to reopen? There's debate about that, and we're going to talk about that in great detail in just a moment. And then Bernie is back. He's endorsed Joe Biden. And are you feeling, if you're a Bernie supporter, are you feeling the burn, or are you feeling a bit burned? And we'll get into that. And then the Postal Service. There's been a lot of talk about the Postal Service in the for a couple of decades now, but certainly in the last couple of weeks, and speculation as to whether or not they can survive, and does Donald Trump want them to survive, and is he to blame for some of their issues? So we'll get into that. But we start with an AP story. Trump claims total authority over governors to reopen economy, according to the AP. President Donald Trump claimed the total authority Monday to decide how and when to reopen the economy after weeks of tough social distancing guidelines aimed at fighting the new coronavirus. And so, this brings up an interesting question. Now, I'm not one that, I defend President Trump. Let me back up. Let me put a little caveat out there. I defend President Trump probably about as strong as anyone you'll see over the airways. But there are times when I disagree with him. One of the reasons I don't say a lot about that is, first of all, I don't disagree with him often, and he's under such constant criticism and blasting from the mainstream media, the never Trumpers, and let alone the progressive Democrats, which are basically all elected Democrats, it seems, that I'm a little reticent to actually criticize the president. But I can tell you, on some of these issues, I probably will be a bit critical. So just brace yourself. But all of this really has to do with it. If the president can order the states to do something, or if it's totally the responsibility of the states themselves, it really comes down to the Commerce Clause. Now, the Commerce Clause is something you hear tossed about quite a bit. We're going to talk very specifically about it. I'm going to show you a short video here in just a minute that explains it, at least the way it should be, about as well as I've seen it done. The Commerce Clause has been used as an excuse to expand federal government long before Donald Trump ever even came on the scene, let alone become president. So I'm going to play you this video. It's not quite 2 minutes long. I want you to pay attention to it. Come back and look at it again, because the Commerce Clause is probably the most abused portion of the Constitution, one of the least understood even by our elected officials, probably especially by our elected officials. And really, it has been used to, in effect, circumvent the Constitution, which is a problem in itself. So without further ado, I want to play you this short clip, kind of your in-home schooling for today. Check this out.
Of the monster state want you to believe the feds can do just about anything they want under the Commerce Clause. They couldn't be more wrong. The so-called Interstate Commerce Clause is found in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the Constitution. The founders explained that it authorizes the federal government to regulate the exchange of goods across state lines, along with some closely related activities such as navigation and marine insurance. This included policies traditionally governed by the rules pertaining to merchants. Commerce did not include other economic or non-economic activities. But today, the courts, bureaucrats, and politicians have expanded the meaning of the word commerce and the clause itself to include any activity that merely affects economic activity. According to their view, growing 6 plants in your backyard is somehow considered interstate commerce. In the view of the Constitution, their position is totally absurd. Here's how James Madison described the Commerce Clause. It was intended as a negative and preventative provision against injustice amongst the states themselves, rather than as a power to be used for the positive purposes of the general government. Simply put, under the Constitution, the Commerce Clause is not something that authorizes the federal government to regulate, control, or prohibit anything and everything they want.
As you can see, that was a very concise. I wanted to play that for you. I could have done similar on it, but I want it to be very concise, and check that out. Let me just give you my quick take on the Commerce Clause, a couple of examples. I don't know if you heard that, but we had a thunderclap right there. We're safe right now. So anyway, but I'm wearing my bunker shirt just in case, from Patriot Threads, by the way, and we hope to have some products from them in the not too distant future. We're still a work in progress. But basically the Commerce Clause has been used to expand the reach of the federal government into the states. The reason why you have the Commerce Clause in the first place, I think my great state of Florida is the prime example of it. If you look at a map of the United States, obviously Florida is a peninsula, sticks down like this. It has Alabama and Georgia as its borders, right at the top. So Florida is, in a sense, more isolated probably than any state other than obviously Alaska, but Alaska really, or Hawaii, but Alaska and Hawaii don't really count. When I say they don't count in my example because they don't border any other states. So to get back to Florida as an example, Florida would be done if Georgia and Alabama were allowed to basically control the interstate commerce. In other words, think about it this way, and this is kind of an extreme example, but right now, all of our states are dependent upon truckers getting goods and services into the various states and across the country. Let's just say, for the sake of conversation, that Alabama and Georgia got together and said, look, we're going to, in effect, shut down the border of Florida. We're not going to allow truckers to either come through into Florida, or they're going to have to pay a special tax, for instance. And Huey Long, by the way, out in Louisiana did this back in the day when he literally lowered the bridges on the Mississippi River so that barges had to be unloaded and then reloaded coming into the state of Louisiana. That is, and effectively he put a tax on goods and services coming from the other states down the Mississippi River. He has since controlled the Mississippi River. The same thing could happen with the interstates coming into Florida. So the Commerce Clause was created to make sure that there was, in a sense, fair trade. It wasn't encumbered, and that states didn't become like little city states, that we collectively were the United States of America. Now, it never was intended, which is what it has become, for it to be this cover-all thing to enact federal government control over the states. I hope I explained that very well. Go back and review the video because it did a better job than me. The most recent example of how the Commerce Clause has been used to expand government is really Obamacare, because that's what the Supreme Court decision led by Chief Justice John Roberts, which in effect gave us Obamacare. The Commerce Clause was used to say that Obamacare, in other words, the federalizing of insurance. And what the Supreme Court ruled on, as I say, once again, led by Justice Roberts, was that it was a tax. And therefore, which the Obama administration, by the way, said it wasn't a tax, but the Supreme Court nonetheless ruled that it was. And that's really how we got Obamacare across the United States of America, by using the Interstate Commerce Clause, which is a real aberration of what the whole thing was supposed to be used for. So how this ties in with now is essentially what President Trump is saying. Now, I'll get into some of the reasons why I believe he's actually doing this, and it's not as it appears to be, I don't think. At least that's my speculation. But President Trump, if you take him at his word, he's basically saying that the federal government has the right and the ability under his auspice as the president to determine whether states open back up for full business or not with this corona COVID-19 virus. Now, he says, let's just go on about it and we'll explore it. But governors from both parties were quick to push back, noting they have primary responsibility for ensuring public safety in their states and would decide when it's safe to begin a return to normal operations. Primary responsibility. I love how they're arguing that. They're arguing that the states have the primary responsibility for public safety, right? Well, they do. But then how do you explain how they've been attacking President Trump for not doing more from the federal government? So they want their cake and eat it too. They want to have autonomy when it comes to running their state, but they want the federal government to basically bail them out. It's not supposed to work that way. Now, I believe that President Trump is in effect setting them up, setting up the governors politically. And there's always politics. I don't care what Jake Trapper says on CNN. There is always politics in decisions. There always has been. And I got to tell you, there always will be. But Trump said at the White House, and this is why I'll make my point about what he might be doing about setting up the governors. Trump said at the White House, when somebody is president of the United States, the authority is total. The governors know that. Well, in a sense, he's right. In one sense, he's not. I don't think what the president is advocating for is constitutional. But we are so far, let me make this point as clear as I can, because this will probably offend some people. We are so far from the Constitution that under the precedent, if you will, that has been set by presidents in the past, that Donald Trump is probably within his authority based on precedent. Now, I don't agree with it, but let me just tell you, Abraham Lincoln settled a lot of this back during the Civil War. I don't agree with it. I'm not getting into the whole merits of the Civil War, but Abraham Lincoln took some actions which were later held to be constitutional, still by constitutional scholars, controversial to this day. There were multiple things he did, but perhaps the most egregious thing that he did during the Civil War was called the suspension of habeas corpus. So I'm going to read you this little paragraph. It's not germane as far as it's not a part of this story, but I guess it is germane to it. On April 27, 1861, Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus between Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia. Interesting how Philadelphia, and we're going to show a video from Philadelphia in just a minute, to give military authorities the necessary power to silence dissenters and rebels. Under this order, commanders could arrest, they're talking about the military now, could arrest and detain individuals who were deemed threatening. So President Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, gave the military the right to arrest individuals, not just in the military, by the way, but individuals means American citizens and others who were here at the time if they were not basically complying with the status quo of the time. Now, does this sound familiar to you? Is it happening right here, right now? You bet you it is. And I'm not blaming President Trump for this. I'm saying that what Abraham Lincoln put in motion has been expanding throughout the history, and it is bearing fruit in today's world. I want to show you this video, and I mentioned Philadelphia because this is what the habeas corpus, interesting how things tie in. We're going to show you a video right now that is of a American citizen, I presume, in a bus in public transit, and apparently he's refusing to wear a mask, and the police come and literally drag this man out who had committed no crime at all other than refusing to wear a mask. I'm not sure he had one or not, but he refused to wear one. Check this out.
Guys, ready, taser? Get out! Get the fuck off my fucking leg! Take me if you fucking want. Where the fuck? Close this door, man. Fucking pussy ass. I want all y'all fucking badge numbers too.
That's good enough.
Yeah.
I want you to notice a couple of things there. They never charged him with a crime. They never read him his Miranda rights or anything like that. They literally dragged him off the bus. Some of those police officers or whatever weren't wearing masks as well, and they sure weren't practicing social distance. The guy drops his cell phone, and did you see how the police officer literally threw it back at him on the ground? As much as what emphasis we place on cell phones, that should be a crime in itself. But do you really, I mean, chime in on whatever Facebook page you're listening to right now, whether it's Media Measures or Citizens for Trump. Good morning, how are you? America's Voice News. We're glad to be on there right now this morning. But let me know, maybe I'm reading this wrong, but are we really I guess we are. We're dragging people out of a city bus for not wearing a mask. There was another video I was looking for that I saw out in Colorado yesterday or day before. There was a gentleman playing chess with his son in a park. I'm assuming the park may have been closed, but there was no one around. It was like a picnic table, and there was no one in sight. They literally handcuffed the father for playing chess with his son because he wasn't practicing social distancing. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if we talk about the economy, and we'll get into that in just a moment, but I'm not sure that the cure for all of this, dragging people off buses, arresting fathers for playing chess in a park, is the cure worse than the disease? I don't know, man. I don't know about you, but it scares me. It terrifies me, and it pisses me off. Anxious to put the crisis behind him, Trump has been discussing with senior aides how to back federal social distancing recommendations, which is all they are, that expire at the end of the month. Well, hey, President Trump, if you happen to be listening, first, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you. But I got an idea. Why don't we just let the states actually decide for themselves? As long as they're not encumbering interstate commerce, back to the interstate commerce clause, why does Texas and New York have to have the same deal? I mean, we don't do it with gun control. Gun control is supposed to be regulated by the states. That's a whole nother ball game. There should really be no federal, by the way, and I know there'll be people who will probably disagree with me on this, but there shouldn't be really any federal control of guns. It should be left up to the states. That's actually what the Second Amendment says. There shouldn't be one size fits all. New York and Texas are different. They just are. And maybe the president, if anything, should actually use the Commerce Act. So if states, and by that I mean, if states are left to decide if they are actually infringing upon true interstate commerce in the process of doing it, that's when the president ought to act, not before. That's just what I'm saying. While Trump has issued national recommendations advising people stay at home, it has been governors and local leaders who have instituted mandatory restrictions, including shuttering schools and closing non-essential businesses. God, you know, if your life depends on the business you run, it is essential by itself. Some of these orders carry fines or other penalties, like dragging a dude off the bus, and in some jurisdictions extend into the early summer. Well, here's the deal. You can't have it both ways. States, governors, citizens of the United States. We're either going to be a constitutional republic or a federal, whatever we are. I'm not sure. And we're certainly leaning more towards that. But you can't say that Donald Trump should control all the preparations for virus control nationwide. But, oh, by the way, when it comes to the economy, it's just left up to the states. Now, I actually believe that's the way it should go. But having it both ways is crazy. And I keep going back to my old buddy Ben Franklin. check this out. This ma'am, to me, our founding fathers look smarter by the day, just like our fathers actually look. But people willing to trade their freedom for security will receive neither. As I talked about, I believe yesterday, at some point, we as citizens, as individual citizens, rugged individualists, one of our responsibilities is to assess our own risk factor. We can't just be, or at least we shouldn't be, we can be, but we shouldn't be just huddled up literally in the corner waiting for President Trump to tell us which way to go or for whatever. I mean, I just don't see it that way. But here's what I do think. I do think that President Trump is setting these people up a little bit, and I'll expand on that in just a moment. As governors made clear Monday, they wouldn't tolerate pressure to act before they deem it safe. In other words, open the economy up. And by the way, President Trump has never set, like Easter is thrown out there, as a solid date for any of this. He has said he hoped. He's trying to keep hope alive, and I'd actually applaud him a great deal for that. But New Hampshire Republican Governor Chris Sununu said all of these executive orders are state executive orders, and so therefore it would be up to the state and the governor to undo a lot of that. Well, here's something that is probably some people are going to think this is sacrilegious for me to even bring it up. But let's just there's so many unconstitutional things, we could do a year's worth of shows on them. But let me bring you up something just for discussion. Is FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Act, is it really agency? Is it constitutional? Is it constitutional for them to, in a sense, if you think about it at its extreme, FEMA literally has the power of martial law. Is it really constitutional? Now, I'm not saying whether or not they've done a good job. And if you're suffering from the effects of a hurricane like Florida, earthquake out in California, you're probably happy to see when FEMA gets there. But are they really constitutional? So these governors are wanting their cake and eat it too. They're wanting to control every aspect of their state, but the preparation for a disaster. That is supposed to be the federal government. It's just not going to work that way. Or at least it shouldn't. Said Michigan governor, so let's hear from a Democrat, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a Democrat, the government doesn't get opened up via Twitter. That's a slam on the president. It gets opened up at the state level. So is she going to be Biden's VP? This is one of the people he's supposedly picking. So the Democrats and the Republicans seem to have something in common. They want their cake and eat it too. They want an ever-expanding power of the federal government, but they don't want that bloated federal government to tell them what to do. It just doesn't work that way. Trump, however, insisted it was his decision to make. Now, this is why I think he may be setting them up. This is what he said. The President of the United States calls the shots. He said, promising to release a paper outlining his legal argument. So he says the President of the United States calls the shots. I got to tell you, and if you've been watching my show any length of time, if you hadn't been, first of all, where you been? Welcome to the show. I'm not politically correct. I'm just not. And I am a strong supporter of the president, even at times when he is wrong. But I got to tell you, him saying the President of the United States calls the shots, that may be the scariest thing that I've ever heard Mr. President say, Mr. Donald J. Trump say. It really scares me to hear him say that. I'm hoping that he is only trying to set them up and playing politics with them. Trump can use his bully pulpit to pressure states to act or threaten them with the consequences, but the Constitution gives public health and safety responsibilities primary to state and local officials. Well, let me ask you, if true, if what they're saying, because these articles can't have it both ways too, if true that the Constitution gives, let me read this again. It says it here, but the Constitution gives public health and safety responsibilities primary to state and local officials. And to use the Democrats' term, if true, then I asked the question I asked earlier, is FEMA actually constitutional? Because if it's primarily, they're arguing, the state's responsibility to promote the public safety and health of their citizens, then why do we even need FEMA? Why should we need it at all? Trump's claim that he could force governors to reopen their states also represents a dramatic shift in tone. And I would agree with him on that. For weeks, Trump has argued that states, not the federal government, should lead response to crisis. I think he's right about that. And he has refused to publicly pressure states to enact stay-at-home restrictions, citing his belief in local control of government. But see, now, the reason why they want the president to take on this big responsibility is they want to blame someone. They want Trump to be to blame for the failure, if you will, of the coronavirus or the United States to deal with the coronavirus. They're hoping and praying that it fails so that Trump can finally be dealt with and done with. But, and this is the big thing, I believe President Trump is actually playing these governors, because if they insist on taking responsibility for when to open up their economy, they're going to get the blame if it goes south. And so I think the president is actually playing a little politics here. At least I hope so, because if he's truly changed his opinion that he basically is the one in charge of every aspect of it, then I got an issue with that. You may not, but I have an issue. I'm still, unlike some friends of mine, I'm not an all or nothing guy. I'm willing to take a look. I don't expect a person to be 100% with me all the time for my support. That is unrealistic, and people do that all the time. I am as strong a Donald Trump supporter today as I was yesterday, but I wouldn't be doing my job here, or at least I wouldn't be true to myself, which is very important to me. I hope it's important to you, but I wouldn't be true to myself if I didn't express these concerns. But I want to show you this. John Yoo, and I don't know anything about Mr. Yoo, Y-O-O, a University of California at Berkeley law professor, said this: while Trump can use his daily White House briefings and Twitter account, they hate him on Twitter, don't they? Because he can talk directly to you. That's why they hate him. Twitter account to shape public opinion and pressure governors to bend to his will. There are real, listen to this very carefully. This is a law professor saying this at Berkeley, which is about as liberal as it gets. I don't know if he is or not. There are real limits on the president and the federal government when it comes to domestic affairs. And so I would ask Mr. Yoo, if I could, did you say the same thing when Barack Obama came out with his famous, I got a pen and I got a phone and I'm going to use it? I wonder if you said anything about that at all. Now, the question, is President Trump, we're going to move on to our next story, but I want to ask you this, and please, respond to me, and I'll come back to you as quickly as I possibly can. Please tell me what you think about this. Is President Trump playing politics with these guys? Really and truly, the problems we are having in dealing with so many things in life, including this pandemic, is the fact that we have gotten so far away from the U.S. Constitution. I've said many times, but if I say it, it bears repeating. If we had a time machine and our founding fathers could come back that created the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, those dudes out there, them old white dudes, old Captain Whitebread here, white men, scourge of the earth kind of thing. If they could come back now and see what is happening in our country, and I'm not talking about, cell phones and all that. I'm talking about how we are governed. They could see how we are governed. I don't think they would recognize it. I think they would either think that the Constitution has been obliterated or we have amended it to the point of no recognition. And I really truly believe that unless we get back to actually looking at the Constitution, teaching it in our public schools through our university, and accepting personal responsibility, rugged individualism, all of those kind of things, until we get back to that, we are never, and I repeat, never going to solve all of these problems that have developed over this, the decades, the centuries here in this country. I can tell you, in my opinion, now I'm not saying that not obeying the Constitution brings on the pandemic. That's not what I'm saying. But the problems we are having with communication, knowing whose job it is to do what, that we're why we're ill prepared. Let me just sum it up with this. The reason why our nation was ill prepared for this is because, in my opinion, we have not been following the Constitution. And until we get back to that, we are going to have problems continue to grow and ultimately much bigger than the pandemic. Because literally lives are being lost by not following the Constitution. Certainly freedoms. If they can drag that dude out of the bus simply because he's not wearing a mask, not charge him with a crime, not reading Miranda rights, none of that stuff, not even arresting him, but manhandling him with a dozen police officers pulling him out of the bus, then it's kind of like that thing where you ignored it and until they came for you. Anyway, maybe I don't make any sense on that, but it shakes me up. And I still support President Trump. I'm going to work extremely hard for him, but I'm hoping that he is playing politics with these guys and not totally changing his tune. All right, we're going to move on to Politico article. Bernie makes it official. It's Biden or bust. So Bernie Sanders has officially now, it only took him a week after he dropped out to officially endorse Joe Biden, but he has come out and endorsed Joe Biden. But not all of his supporters have. Joe Biden became the Democratic Party's indisputable presidential nominee Monday when Bernie Sanders paid a surprise visit to former Vice President's live cast and issued an unexpected and full-throated endorsement. So, old Bernie and Biden are together again. Indisputable. I love this part. Indisputable presidential nominee. That's actually not true, by the way. Joe Biden it looks like he's going to be the undisputed, if you will, or eventual nominee, but no delegates have actually cast a vote. So I don't know how they're going to have a convention. Both parties have issues with that. But as my understanding, until the delegates have cast their vote, not the people, the delegates have cast their vote, Biden is the presumptive nominee, not the indisputable presidential nominee. In fact, they're not talking a lot about it, but there are Democrats out there that are still wondering about Mr. Joe Biden. And you know who might be one of those? Barack Obama. Sanders, who formally suspended his campaign last week, said he needed everyone, not just his supporters, to back Biden and make sure that President Trump becomes a one-term president. Remember when Mitch McConnell said that about Obama? He was called everything but a child of God. But I guess that you can, that whole thing of a double standard, if you're just new to my show, let me just tell you flat out, there is no double standard. There is not one. I mean, I hear conservative people say, oh, it's a double standard. I hate to tell you, there ain't no double standard. There is only one standard, and it is held to conservatives, people who support Donald Trump. We are held to a standard. The left, the progressive, they can say and do anything they want, anytime they want. And they're held to no standard. So there is a standard, but the progressive left is not held to it. And here's the thing. Has Bernie endorsed, by his endorsement, and this is something you Bernie bros have to figure out, is this a sellout? I mean, I knew Bernie was going to sell out, but when he announced he was running for president, I didn't think he was going to win. I thought he could win, but as the campaign progressed, I could see that the same thing that happened to Bernie in 2016, and no, I'm not talking about him stabbed in the back by the Democrats, although he was Bernie's refusal to take on his real adversaries. Because you can't take on Donald Trump until you get to Donald Trump. He had to take on Hillary Clinton in 2016. He didn't. He had to take on, ultimately, Joe Biden. He didn't. He sold out. He weaned out, man. But Sanders told Biden in this surprise, I like how they say that it was a surprise visit to Joe Biden's, live stream. Like, we're surprised today. Right, man. How stupid do they think we are? Apparently pretty stupid. Today, this is what Bernie said. Today, I'm asking all Americans. I'm asking every Democrat. I'm asking every independent. I'm asking a lot of Republicans. Notice, what about all the people who don't have to get a voter ID or whatever? What about all the illegal immigrants? Is he asking them too? Like what was it? Stacey Abrams said, I'm for the documented and the undocumented. He's leaving some people out, right? But Bernie said he wants them to come together in this campaign to support your candidacy, talking about Biden, which I endorse, to make certain that we defeat somebody who I believe is the most dangerous president in the modern history of the country. I'm assuming he must be talking about old DJT. So Donald Trump is the most dangerous president. Let me just tell you, Bernie, we escaped that. We escaped the most dangerous president of the United States when you dropped out. You know, Biden is dangerous because I don't even think he could drive a car to the market to get his prescription drugs. He's dangerous in that sense. But he's not going to be president. Even if he's elected president, it's going to be somebody else. But Bernie would have definitely ruled. There's no question about it. Like I told several friends of mine, if I had to choose, simply, if my only choice, because I've never not voted, so I always vote. But if my choice was just Biden versus Bernie, as much as I disagree with Bernie, I would vote for Bernie for one factor only. The fact that the guy is at least mentally there. I may not agree with him on anything, but he's mentally there. And I just don't think Biden is. Sanders pledged after calling Trump a racist, a sexist, a xenophobe, and a religious bigot. Don't hold back, Bernie. Tell us what you really think. Who botched the nation's initial response to the coronavirus. Now, I got in a little debate with some people on Facebook yesterday, not on like my site, but sometimes I can't help but chime in on some people's what I think is ridiculous BS, but that's just my opinion. And they put this thing out about the president calling different reporters names, and they keep saying this is unpresidential. Well, is it presidential? And now Bernie's not the president, but to call, they talk about Trump calling people names, but I've never heard Trump call someone racist, sexist, xenophobe, and religious bigot. I mean, yeah, those sound very, I know they're textbook names. I mean, I guess Shorty is not one or whatever, little guy or, little Marco, all that kind of stuff. Crazy Bernie. Those are like names you can't say. We need some George Carlin. Names you can't call people, but bigot, that's okay. White supremacist, that's okay. But let me tell you what I told these people online. And you, once again, chime in and tell me if you agree or disagree. I didn't vote for President Trump because I thought he would be presidential. In fact, I didn't want him to be presidential. I'm tired of presidential. I voted for Donald Trump for one main reason. I wanted him to go to Washington, D.C. and drop a political bomb on the place, to just literally blow it up politically. That is what I voted for President Trump, not to be the most polite guy in the world, not to be presidential. I voted for him to politically blow the place up. And as I told this person on Facebook, I voted for people on all sides of the political spectrum for office. I have. But, some of them I've been proud to say I supported. Some of them I'm like, hey, I made a mistake there. But I can tell you without any reservation whatsoever, I have never been more proud of my choice than I was in 2016 and today with President Trump. And I am excited to vote for him again in 2020. I want to see Trump not only be unhinged as they worry about, I want Donald Trump to be unleashed. So I don't want, presidential don't bother me. I'm just speaking for myself. But here's what this Bernie said. He said, I will do all that I can to see that happens, Joe. In other words, you get elected and make Donald Trump a one-term president. Now, keep in mind, I hope that he has the same power to elect Biden president as he did, but when he endorsed Hillary. And for you Bernie bros out there that are wondering about which way to go here, should you show up and vote for Joe Biden? Should you stay home? Should you vote for a third candidate if there is one? Or should you potentially think about supporting Donald Trump? Let me remind you of a couple things. Bernie has now back-to-back endorsed, because you guys are talking about anti-establishment, revolution, movement, all that. Bernie has now come out and endorsed back-to-back two of the most establishment candidates in history, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. And I say that without reservation. There's no question. Now, there may be someone who is tied with them for being establishment, but ain't nobody more establishment than those two. But then again, maybe I shouldn't be surprised because Bernie himself is establishment. You can't, the only job the dude's ever really had is an elected official. He's been in Congress up there, including the House and the Senate, for like 50 years, man. He is about as establishment as you can be. And all you need to know, you Bernie bros out there, that'll tell you that I'm right. Do a little bit of research and you'll see that Bernie did not endorse Ocasio-Cortez until after she won. He supported the 26-year incumbent in that race against Ocasio-Cortez. He did not support her until after she won and he could use her for his purposes. To me, that's all you need to know. But Biden said, I want to thank you for that, the endorsement. It's a big deal. Your endorsement means a great deal to me. So what is Bernie going to be in charge of? Is he going to be part of Biden's cabinet? I mean, we already know that the gun issue is being controlled by Paco. You say, who? Well, that's what I call Beto. He's more of a Paco than a Beto to me. This is a guy who, doesn't even want the name his mama gave him, Robert Francis O'Rourke. So I wonder what Bernie's going to be in charge of. He's not going to be the VP, right? Because Biden's already come out and said it's got to be a woman. Oh, my psychic sidekick said, well, the Democrats have a remedy for that. All they got to do is go, and you can be a woman. So maybe Bernie he has time. He's got time to qualify as that if he so chooses. Or maybe he could just say, I'm feeling as a woman today. But this is my psychic sidekick, by the way, Billy Bob Bass. He has a Twitter handle. It's at Billy Bob Bass 1, and mine is at John Martin Talks. But I got a feeling that Bernie is going to be dropped like a hot potato once he gets past his usefulness. So we'll see. Now, I want to read you. There's one woman that actually didn't, because we're running out of time, and I want to cover this. There's one woman that didn't actually support Mr. Sanders, and I got to skip to this part. Anyway, it was his press secretary, the gal that ran his communications. She is not for Biden. She came out and publicly didn't endorse him. And of course, where is Obama now? Obama still hasn't come out and endorsed Joe Biden. Do I think he's going to? Ultimately, yes. But I do think he's holding out. Maybe he was waiting on Bernie, so maybe it'll happen today or into this week. But I do think that he is suspect that Biden is still potentially going to collapse. So I'll close with something I kind of close with quite often, and that is a question for you Bernie bros. You Bernieites out there. You say you want a revolution. Bernie ain't the revolutionary man, and Biden, he isn't. If you want one, why don't you go with somebody because we already have one. Get on board the Trump train, baby. Donald Trump is the most revolutionary presidential candidate and now president and candidate now in 2020. Certainly in my lifetime, but you could make a case ever to actually sit in the White House. And Biden is a train wreck. He is a total train wreck. So get on board the Trump train, get off the Biden train. But if you're undecided or if you're thinking you're going to commit to Joe Biden, I'm going to do this right up through election day. You should be forced with your eyes taped open, slapped from sleep deprivation or whatever. You should be made to watch this video in a continuous loop 24/7 if you're still thinking about getting with Joe Biden. Check it out.
And by the way, I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
You ought to have to watch that in a continuous loop. All right, we got one more quick story I want to touch on, and it comes to you from a publication I have not used before called Quartz. So I don't know much about them, but I know about this issue because it's been on the forefront for a while. Trump grudge against U.S. Postal Service is a threat to U.S. election. And you may say, how so? The U.S. Postal Service, USPS, is in financial trouble. It's losing about $2 billion a month. $2 billion a month as mail marketers halt campaigns due to sudden pandemic-induced economic meltdown. So that junk mail is dropped off, which is what keeps the post office service alive. But the post office has been a mess for a long time. So you may wonder, well, first of all, they want to blame it on Trump, right? Here is what's really going on. Listen to this, and they say it multiple times in here, but this paragraph sums it up. Yet the federal agency, talking about the post office, is more essential than ever. Delivering mail, now it's not to get your Amazon packages out there, your toilet paper by mail, delivering mail to the most remote American addresses, and it will only become more critical as the November presidential election approaches and mail-in voting grows more appealing. So the post office has been in trouble for decades. They want to blame President Trump, but it is a campaign issue. It means because they want to clear the way for all mail-in voting. Not absentee voting, but mail-in voting, which if you haven't heard this before, I'm telling you, is the most dangerous thing, not only to the Trump presidency, but our republic that I have ever seen. It's more dangerous than the Russians or anybody else. It is if we do an all mail-in voting, it is going to be corruption. They're going to steal this election and every election to come. The Constitution might as well be like Nancy Pelosi tearing the State of the Union address. We cannot let this happen. I cannot emphasize enough, I'm not talking about absentee balloting. Absentee balloting is a process where you request a vote. It is tracked. There's some accountability, but you have to request it. The mail-in is they just mail it to every registered voter. Keep in mind that states like Virginia just said we don't even want voter ID at the ballot box. So they don't care about the integrity of the vote. They just want to be able to steal it. And that's what this is all about. I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. And oh, by the way, the post office, last time they were broke even basically was in 2006. So this is not a new problem, not Donald Trump's problem uniquely. But I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. I'll pray for your family. You pray for mine. But above all else, like I say each and every day, from my heart, from my family to yours, have a blessed day.